Final Fight was released in the arcades in 1989 by Capcom. It was originally intended to be a sequel to 1987's Street Fighter, and even carried the working title of Street Fighter 89. During development, they changed course and went from a head-to-head fighter into a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and the name was changed to Final Fight. This game has been ported to a number of different consoles over the years, and in this video, I'd like to take a look at two examples of this game released on Nintendo consoles. The first home version of Final Fight I've ever heard about was the Super Nintendo version. If I'm not mistaken, it was one of the earliest third-party releases for the Super Nintendo. Two notable features of the arcade were omitted for space. The character Guy and the Industrial District stage were both cut. There were also some censorship. Jessica, the damsel in distress, appeared in a bra when you see her on the TV screen in the original, but she was given a red top in this version. Also, Nintendo didn't want the male heroes beating up on any female opponents, so the characters named Poison and Roxy were gender reassigned and became punks Billy and Sid. Aside from the changes, this was the first exposure to this game for many gamers, including myself. The big characters and colorful graphics really made it stand out compared to the NES beat-em-ups that most of us saw previously. Probably the biggest flaw of this game is the omission of two-player co-op mode. Nowadays, everyone knows that busting heads in a belt scroller like this is best with a friend. The game may seem a little primitive now, but in its time, it was a hit. It was the first real big 16-bit beat-em-up. And even with its alterations from the arcade version, people still quite enjoyed it. It's also worth noting that there was a different port of the game which omitted Cody instead of Guy, called Final Fight Guy. This version of the game only saw an exclusive release to the Blockbuster video rental stores here in America, and nowadays it fetches well over $100 in the used market. I remember at one point selling the copy that I had for about $30 in the late 90s. Now let's take a look at a portable version of Final Fight. Final Fight 1 is among many of the revamped games from the Super Nintendo era to make an appearance on the GBA. This version brings back a lot of the features missing from the Super Nintendo version. Cody, Guy, and Hagar are all playable. The Industrial District is back, and so is co-op play. A lot of the visual design elements are just as they were in Final Fight Guy on the Super Nintendo. The biggest change is that they had added some dialogue exchanges before the boss battles in the style of Street Fighter Alpha 3 in order to flesh out the story mode more. Also available are unlockable alternate appearances for both Cody and Guy based on their appearances in Street Fighter Alpha 3. A lot of people look at the Game Boy Advance and think of it sort of like a portable Super Nintendo. A lot of Super Nintendo and NES games were ported to the Game Boy Advance, and I think it is partly responsible for the resurgence in popularity of a lot of retro gaming. When you look at games like Final Fight 1, you see a game that's a familiar arcade classic with some new additions that brought something new to the table, and I think that was a really nice touch. I'm sure there's some retro purists out there who weren't big fans of the alterations. However, I find that Final Fight 1 is a superior game to the Super Nintendo version. However, that does not mean that the Super Nintendo version is a bad game by any stretch. If you overlook the lack of the co-op mode, lack of the playable character, and the omitted level, it's still a solid title. And as I said before, it was a big hit in its time. Hope you've enjoyed this review. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.